Welcome back to another Notes of Interest. I am D'Anthony Charles. We're here with Mr. Carl Augustin, and he is the project officer for the ISO project. Last week we dealt with the issue of land desertification and drought as the world commemorated the observance of the World Day of land desertification and drought. There were a number of projects which happened on Thursday and Friday, and we're going to speak with Carl about that and how this impacts the St. Lucian environment. So, firstly, thank you so much. I know you're very busy. You've been busy all morning. You're in a meeting. We took you out for 5 minutes, and we really appreciate your time. But this is an important issue. And I think when people think of desertification, desert type conditions, they think, oh, this is not the Caribbean. This cannot happen in St. Lucia. And as we did our project on Friday, and on Thursday, we recognized, based on some of the things that you explained to us, that this is very relevant to our situation. And then we have the issue of drought, because we're just coming out of a 6-month dry spell, and this has impacted our lands, not only for forestry but agriculture, and soil is very important. So let's go back to the beginning. What is the land desertification and drought commemoration event? Why does St. Lucia feel it necessary to have to observe this particular international day?
Okay, so I'll say good morning again. My name is Carl Monty Augustin, and I'm a forest officer, but I've been reassigned, so I am the project coordinator for the Integrated Watershed and Ecosystems Project, or the IWECO project. And what I will say is, touching on the World Desertification Day and UNCCD, which is the UN Convention to Combat Desertification and Drought. Now, this started in 1994 and did not come into effect until sometime around 95-96. However, it was recognized that, and St. Lucia is a signatory, and what the day does is basically to draw attention to the whole idea of desertification. And what is desertification? Desertification is basically the movement of an arable land, or land that is proper for cultivation, productive, and so on, and through degrading or degradation, that land transitions from being arable to being a land that is no longer arable and no longer suited or no longer productive, right? So you basically going now from a land that has a certain amount of soil and water, soil water retention capacity, a certain level of productivity, a certain level of availability of nutrients, fertility, and so on. And the whole, as it is degraded, it loses some of those physical characteristics, it loses some of those chemical characteristics, and so on. The amount of water it can hold is lessened. The amount of diversity it has in terms of life forms, both on the surface and within the soil itself, lessens. Now, for us, we will say, well, we don't have deserts. But the issue is not just you going from a nice fertile mountain to a barren wasteland. No, we are looking at all of the points in between those two extremes, right? And what we have been seeing now is, due to some of the agricultural practices, the land management practices, that we've been having a negative impact on our soils. The monocultures that we have practiced for years, where we have eliminated everything else other than 1 or 2 species that we find important, also has its impact in terms of the microflora and fauna that you will find in the soil. But you also find now that this is made worse by the whole event of the changing climate that we're experiencing, where you find the rainfall regime has changed. The amount of days between showers,
Go ahead, go
right?
ahead.
Yes, the amount of days between showers have lengthened from around 3 to 4 days in the 80s to around 7 or so days now. And what you find now is we may be getting less regular rain, but when we do get rain, we may get too much rain at once, which may in itself now cause issue with excessive erosion and runoff and so on. So UNCCD now basically is saying that through better management of the land, that you can actually secure it for multiple generations and so on. Now, projects like mine, although my project is not funded by UNCCD, but it is a UNEP project, a UN Environmental Program project, right, via GEF, which is the Global Environmental Forum, right, or facility, sorry. We now are looking at the whole aspect of sustainable land management and the impact that this can have now on reducing land degradation and reducing the impact of land degradation through sustainable use of the land, through sustainable management of the land. We also now get towards restoring some of those degraded areas. And some of that degradation could be because of poor practices. We have predisposed some of those lands to being eroded, or you have mass wasting, things like landslides and
What
so on happening during heavy rainfall periods, right?
Right. What would you consider to be those issues? Because you talked about landslide. Are there any, well, I guess deforestation, man-made action, man-made
Exactly.
activities which contribute to that desertification? What else could
But you
you
also
tell
have
us?
things like, for example, wildfires. Wildfires play a very important role because even if you have
In
now a place that has
desertification.
nice, luscious vegetation, and then now you come and you light a fire there, and you burn down that vegetation, and then every year now you come and you keep burning that same zone. What would happen is the forest that is there will not get a chance to regrow, and then you find a transition now from forests to grasslands because it's grasses that would grow within that short space of time between the intervals of burning. So when you do that over a period of time, you would find now that the vegetation significantly changes. But you would also find because the vegetation changes, the conditions and the qualities of the soil will change. So you will find now burning also eliminates all of the organic material that you would have in that soil. So it changes the physical characteristic of that soil. It will also kill a lot of the microorganisms that you have because most of the life of the soil are found in the first few inches of the soil. Right? So when you come and you burn, you're increasing the temperature of that area significantly. You also impacting on the water that is contained within that soil. So that
But
repeated
Mr.
burning
Gassin,
predisposes the land
mhm.
to transition even at a quicker rate towards
But
becoming
Mr. Gassin,
non-arable and
people have,
non-productive. Yes?
right. But people have been using slash and burn as a means to clear their estates, their large plots, so that they can farm. And what are you saying is that this may not, are you saying that this may not be the wisest thing to do?
No, this is not the wisest thing, but bear what? A lot of times before the slash and burn method used to be used with a shift in cultivation system as well. So they slash and burn for
Mhm.
1 or 2 years, right? They benefit from the lack of the burning may have some positives in terms of it may eliminate the pests and so on as well. They benefit from that for 1 or 2 growing seasons, 3 growing seasons, and then they move to another plot and start the process. But while they're in that other plot doing a slash and burn, the plot that they destroyed before gets a chance to renew itself. Right? But since shifting cultivation is no longer because you had only peasant level farming. Right? So that is no longer the norm because most people want to settle. I want to grow multiple crops over time. So the constant burning now is becomes a negative, because now you always put in the soil on that level of stress, and then you leave it bare. It stays a length of time with nothing on it. During that period, if it is battered by rain, what would happen? You will have a lot of surface runoff, because there's nothing shielding the surface of the soil from getting the impact of the raindrops and so on. Right? So this is definitely a negative practice. And what you also find is, by destroying that piece of vegetation, you're also impacting on the biodiversity, because you would have had species of birds and reptiles and so on that make their home there, that find their food there. By eliminating it, you are actually putting pressures on their population. Right? They have to shift to where they can go, and sometimes they may not always be able to get a replacement. And you may actually just have a number of them just being killed by the fire itself, as we saw happen in Australia, where vast amount of wildlife was wiped away with the fires that you had. Right? So it is a net negative, even if there may be some short-term benefits to be derived. Right? So we're saying that there are other means, and what we're promoting, especially I'm standing in our nursery, in the project nursery, and you can see we have a number of trees here, and we're focusing mainly on trees of economic value, because we recognize the need for farmers to earn, for people to earn money from the land that they own, the land that they manage. But what we're saying under those projects is, there are more sustainable means and approaches that you can take that can make you make money long term, while still keeping your land available for the next generation.
So on Thursday, you took us into the Badney Forest Reserve area, and you showed us a some vanilla plants and an alternative way to
Yes.
farm. Now that you've spoken about the slashing and the burning and moving from one plot to the next, tell us about this alternative way to farm and how some of the positives that may come from this type of farming, and what are some of the projects that are products that can occur in that type of farming.
Okay. So we actually promoting what they call agroforestry, right? And below forest canopy production, food production. So the agroforestry is basically saying that in the same piece of land, we can have forest species. So that is the forestry
Mhm.
part of it. But we can also be doing crops, in some cases short-term crops. But this has even transitioned to what they call agro-silvo-pastoral systems. But we're saying in that same piece of land, you might also be able to graze and rear animals and so on, livestock, including things like bees or cattle or small ruminants and so on. So we're promoting that. We're saying that if you have a piece of land right now, you can actually set it up and design it in such a way that you can have space for tree crops. You can either do it in strips or plant along your boundaries, or designate certain parts of that land for tree crops or for forest species and so on, right? And you can get benefits from that. And then you have your space where you would do your shorter term crops, your perennials and so on. You could have an intercrop system. And then once you have now a certain critical mass of fruit bearing and forest species, then it is easy for you to bring in your bees and for them to forage. It is easy for you to bring in your small ruminants, and they can graze on the grass and so on, while you get your production of fruits. What we saw on Thursday with the vanilla is, we are saying that we want to test different cropping systems that can actually perform well in areas where you have permanent trees. So in the case of vanilla, vanilla is a species that is indigenous to our region, the Americas. It was taken by the French, brought to the French Polynesian islands, and then brought back to the region, to the Caribbean, right? This is a high value crop, and it grows here naturally, grows here nicely. But the issue that we have grown them on trees. So as the tree gets taller, the vine grows up the tree. It is a problem for your management. And since the vanilla flowers needs to be pollinated manually, it creates a particular issue as you get older, as the farmer or the landowner gets older. So we now decided to test a trellis method that would allow the vine to grow no taller than around 6 to 7 feet tall. That would allow the farmer, the landowner, to be able to pollinate every year, and thus getting more production while having his plants and them within easy reach for management purposes and so on. We are also looking at the whole idea of growing things like orchids below forest cover which is their natural habitat, right? But what you have seen happening is the production of orchids, flowers, has been done in greenhouses, shade houses, which cost a lot of money to establish. So it means that people with low economic capacity cannot access or cannot go into that type of production. If you're a young person and you say, but I want to do flowers, by the time you hear of, but you need to purchase 1 or 2 greenhouses, you have to do your shade houses, you might be talking about tens of thousands of dollars of infrastructure you need to develop before you can start planting. So we're saying, but what if we can forego the need for the infrastructure by saying now we will grow it, utilize the trees, to grow
as
it on
a
the trees,
greenhouse.
under the forest, in the habitat where you already have the proper what I call it again,
The
climate. You have
canopy
the proper
and the climate.
microclimate and so on.
Mhm.
Right? Now we want to go another step further to say things like edible mushrooms. These are something that can have a positive impact on food security. But guess what? It is something now, again, now, if you want to do it in its current method, you have to invest heavily in the infrastructure. While there are species that will grow under the forest setting, utilizing what may consider to be waste, which is the fallen trees, broken branches, and so on. Or even within our own regimes of doing um thinnings in our plantations, we can convert what is considered to be a waste into food. And we can do that in the same space that somebody is growing vanilla, the same space that somebody is growing cut flowers. And you now, in so doing, have multiple revenue stream from the same site while having minimal impact on the resource itself. And you actually could help increase diversity because you add in new species that other species may feed on and so on and so forth. Right? So we are looking at piloting some of these under the IW Eco project, right? And because of that, now we are more than just saying we are doing restoration of degraded areas, but we're looking at livelihood issues, long-term sustainability issues that people have to be able to make money from their land while doing the positive and the good practices in order for it to make sense. So it is not an either or. Either I take care of my land and manage it properly, or I make money. One of the objectives is to make you make money from managing your land in a sustainable way.
Right. Now, just a little ways off of the Badney area, we visited
Is the
a
Badlin area?
plot of
Badlin.
land where right, there was a landslide, and
Yes.
I want you to explain to me and to us viewing what happened there and what were some of the measures that you took so that you could
And we took
have rehabilitated that area. And
restored
right
the
now I
good.
see we have an image here of the fertilizing of the vanilla plant in the forest area. That's the picture that we have
Yes.
up right now. Right.
Yes. Yes.
So yes, tell us about the Badney
Okay. So
redevelopment.
all right. So in the Bad Lil area is a critical juncture for us. It's along the highway where the highway cuts through the central rainforest area, right? Now, in that particular zone, we had a high level of impact during Hurricane Thomas. Number of landslides. The road actually had to be closed for like almost a month. And that had a serious economic impact and so on. For us, what we did was we look at implementing some erosion control measures. So we would do what they call check dams, which are basically little barriers that you would put in the gullies and so on where the water is passing to slow down the rate at which that water flows and for the sediments in that water to accumulate. Once we put in, we would actually utilize species which coppice, species which will grow easily from cuttings. So things like the gloricedia, things like the mortel and them. And we would construct those check dams at intervals coming down the landslide. And the aim would be to trap as much sediment as possible, allow for some of those coppicing species to grow back up to create now the conditions for other species to grow later on, right? So we're creating the conditions. We also planted a lot of grasses like the vetiver grass, as well as shrubbery like the fatpo, which are tolerant of marginal soils, marginal areas, right? But once they start growing, they will help now to convert, to enrich the zone, and to make it now more suited for other species to survive. And in some cases, what has happened is once we were able to slow down the rate of erosion, the amount of damage that the water was doing, you would have had now natural regeneration. So seeds that were blown from other adjacent forested zones, seeds which were carried by flying birds and so on. And then you find now a lot of those areas actually now are flourishing. In areas where you had very steep slopes, we laid what we call geotextile. And we had two basic type of geotextile. One that was interwoven with compostable plastic. And then we had one that was just jute, the material jute that they used to use for the peanut bags and so on before. And what we did was to lay those utilizing, and the pegs we would use to anchor them were actually cuttings of species which would coppice. And what that geotextile will do is to form an artificial barrier on the soil surface so it reduces the impact of rainfall and thus in reducing the erosion and so on that would happen. You can. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I know you're in a meeting, so and I know you have to go back to it. I want you to leave us with some final words. Yes.
Yeah. So what? Sorry.
Yeah, if you could leave us with some final words about
final words. Okay, so I would say, sorry that I can't stay longer, but what I would say is there are benefits in restoring some of those degraded areas. The main objective is to build the resilience of those zones so that now they can withstand the shocks of the heavy rainfalls and so on. We also have to think about management. So there are areas where simple things like doing some pruning and certain types of cutting could actually build resilience on the slope. And it's not a matter of just allowing land to be rewild, but it's a situation of things we impacted on through construction of roads and so on. We have to be looking at where we do sustainable management. We also have to be thinking of food production, food sovereignty, and ensuring now that we preserve the material, the soil, so that people from the next generation, right, the current crop of young people can benefit from the soil, right? And soil protection or soil management also has a big effect on the availability of water. One of the ways we can counteract or we can fight against the droughts that we're having is to cover more of our land, is to ensure that our riverbanks are well forested so we don't lose too much water through evapotranspiration and so on. Is to ensure that we utilize the resource judiciously in a manner that we are aware that we can only abstract no more than a certain amount from the river without having a negative impact on the resource. Right? So on our project, we are looking at more or less sustainably managing the resource and to help to build the capacity of people and hopefully to help change the mindset and the practices that will impact us negatively. Right? So thanks for having me, sir. Hopefully the IWECO
Thank you
can
so
meet.
much.
And
We'll do a
I'm
lot
sure
more
we'll
of
speak
these.
again.
We'll do a lot more of these because we have other activities coming up that we're going to be doing together. So we will do a lot more of these and hopefully get people on board with what we're trying to do. So thank you so much for taking your time out of your meeting to join us. We'll let you get back to that. That's Carl Augustine
Yes.
from the IWS Echo project as we deal with desertification and drought in St. Lucia and ways to combat that. Yeah, thank you so much.
Have a good one, sir.
Have a good one. So, we at the National Farmers would like to encourage you, our members, to continue to observe this program. You can like us on our Facebook page. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and join us here every Monday from 9:30 as we deal with notes of interest. What's important to you, what's important to our members, and how we can create change for our society. We'd like to thank you once again for joining us for this special edition that we had in observance of the World Day to combat desertification and drought. One of the things that Carl Augustine was definitely talking about is all the little things that we don't actually take into consideration in our human activity that adds to desertification, which is creating desert-like condition and burning, deforestation. Those are some of the issues. So we'll continue to keep this information up and upfront on the National Farmers social media pages as we try to improve and educate our communities and our members on what's happening. Thank you for joining us here on Notes of Interest. Remember to like and subscribe and see you again next week.